For those viewers of my channel who have commented appreciatively about my tour of my home recording studio and electronics lab, I thought I would present a very brief update since the original video was done. I have done quite a bit of revision in here, and I think I'll highlight some of the changes. First off, I'd commented before about how I kept parts bins under my workbench, and that I was thinking of changing it because it was getting harder for me to get down there under the table all the time to get small parts. It was kind of dark and I had to get on my hands and knees, and with my bifocals it was getting hard to see the components, much less the labels on the drawers. So what I've done is I've moved all that out of there, and instead I've taken a bunch of other stuff that was, you know, various loose bits and pieces of things that were just piled up, and put them in these plastic tubs. And I don't want to go into too many details here, but I'm a big fan of the Timex simple set clocks, which have a keypad on the top, very large displays, and you can easily set the time or the alarm by just typing in the number you want instead of the usual digital clock nonsense of having to use one button to scroll through everything tediously. And especially with me, since I have a lot of weird get-up times for various flights and trips and so on, I found it really a pain to set the usual clocks. So I've got these Timex clocks, and I think they've been discontinued, so I bought quite a few of them. I don't know, 4 or 5 of them, given a few away to relatives, and I still have about 3 or 4 in this bin here in case something happens to the other ones. I have still quite a few clock kits, some Nixie tube clock kits, and various other ones that I just bought because they look cool and never built them. Got a lot of power cords, wire wrap rolls, transformers, timers, a Geiger counter or two, a bunch of muffin fans, a bunch of retro computers that I built, a collection of membrane keypads. I have a couple computers by Lee Hart, retro computers. I've got my Cosmac Elf, I've got my Inquisitor vintage memory IC testing unit, all the light bulbs, protoboards, garbage, battery holders, plastic enclosures, hardware, one of my Simpson 260s, various test leads. There's all these tech wipes, Q-tips, and wipes of various sorts in various bins. Got a couple of music boxes I was working on, various battery charges, more tech wipe stuff. I'm still trying to find a home for my wire recorder, which is currently hanging out down here. I'm probably going to be getting rid of 1 or 2 of my open reel recorders that I've decided I have 1 or 2 too many, and that'll give me a better place to put that. Anyway, I designed and had fabricated a custom bookshelf, not to be used as a bookshelf, but to be used in place of the small prefab one that I used to have in this position, which held my notebook computer. And I used to keep open reel tapes on the old shelf, but I've gotten rid of those. I moved all my parts bins from under my workbench up here where I can get at them and see them much easier. Various rolls of wire and so on. So I've got hardware bins, a resistor assortment, and then 4 bin cabinets, if you will. And the shelf is designed to have room for those and not a lot of extra space. So that's working out real well. Also, since the last video, I've upgraded my Primera CD and DVD printer from a 4100 to a 4200, and that was because I was having a lot of problems with the ink system on the 4100. As brilliantly fast as it was, it was not at all tolerant of sitting very long without doing some printing, and I got a lot of head clog issues. It was hard to clean, and they also came out with this newer model. I think it's just more robust, although it's not as fast. But I think for less of a headache, it's better for me, so I decided to spend some tax refund money and get that, and paid for this cabinet. And one other thing I didn't mention when I was showing the lab before, I still haven't got a good place for this, but I've got a blast door control panel from a Titan ICBM missile silo. Still got the government ID tag on it. I haven't decided how I want to display this, or where to put it, or how to have it work. Right now I just got it wired up, so I push a button, the blast door open light comes on. One of these fine days I'll figure out a better place to mount and display that. I was actually going to put some sort of a circuit in here that I could actually simulate the operation of the blast door, where you'd have to, you know, hold the button down for a while, and then when the limit switch on the door makes, then the light would come on, and then push the close button, and after a couple seconds the light would go out, but you'd have to hold it for a while yet. And the Titan II Missile Museum near Tucson, Arizona, provided me with the details of exactly how these panels behaved, so I was going to come up with a little circuit to tuck in there and simulate the operation, but that's another thing that is waiting for a rainy day. I've also generally been trying to unclutter my house somewhat, and I've got tons of these plastic bins, all the same size, and in my basement, other places in my house, and here I've been trying to sort of compartmentalize things into these bins instead of just having things piled up the way I used to. I kept in mind that I would have to know what's in these without having to open them all up, but at the same time I figured I might be moving things from one bin to another, or throwing some stuff away, adding some stuff, and the contents of the bins could change quite a bit. And I have a label maker. I could certainly put a label on, but I would constantly be printing new ones and moving them around. So I found this stuff here. It's actually, I think 3M makes, this is a generic one, but 3M makes something just like this. And it's a roll of, in this case it's about 1.5 inches wide, but I think 3M makes it up to 2 inches wide. Anyway, it's a low-tack adhesive or high-tack adhesive, whatever. You can put it on, but it peels off fairly nicely without leaving any goop behind. And the surface of it is a vinyl, but it's for dry erase, so you can easily cut it to length, stick it on pretty much anything with a smooth surface. I don't think they stick very well to wood and so on, but metals, plastics. And then you just use your basic dry erase marker on it, and you can either wipe it off by hand or use the regulation dry erase erasers. And I think that's a pretty good solution for this. I think the only downside I've found so far is that because it's dry erase, when you're handling the bins, it's pretty easy to bump it with your hand and smear the lettering. Still coming to terms with that, but I think overall it's a pretty good solution to flexible storage. Anyway, so I have a video on YouTube of this little stool that I made, or little multi-level table, to help organize my test equipment better. I still have this AMREL power supply. I moved my X-Tech power supply that used to be over here. I moved that elsewhere. It's not in my lab anymore. It's being used for something else. And almost identical specifications to the AMREL is a Siglent SPD3303X programmable DC power supply. Just like the AMREL, it's a linear supply. The voltage and current ratings on all three channels of both supplies are very comparable, so it's almost like having two of the same thing. The user interface is pretty slick on here. It's got the usual constant voltage, constant current, all the overloads, programmability, nice display. And between the two of these, that should handle any power supply needs I have on my bench. Turn these off as I talk about them. The second level of this bench now gives me a much more organized place to keep my various little testers. I've got a peak transistor and semiconductor component analyzer and identifier. And I've got separate YouTube videos on these various Chinese component and IC testers. I've got a good place to organize them now and get at them easily when I need them. My analog scope is still up here. It's still, I think, the quickest and easiest one to use of all my scopes that I have had, and it's still my primary one just for quick and dirty testing. I was originally going to put it on the lower level and have this other stuff up higher, but I realized that the big toroid transformers in these linear supplies would cause some jitter on the CRT if I put it right on top of it. Before, I used to have another power supply which I'd built in this position right on top of the AMREL, and that provided a buffer, and the transformers in that weren't nearly so big. So having this second layer here also, as a side effect of the storage, it gets the scope further away from the power supply, so I don't have the jitter anymore. And I still have my primary, secondary, and tertiary meters here. Another thing that's new is this Siglent SDS1204XE digital storage oscilloscope. This is a 4-channel scope with a 200 megahertz upper end, and as typical with these sort of prosumer grade scopes, which are coming out of several companies now, they actually have very good specs. The main thing that they lose in usability is they only have one set of controls for all 4 channels, so you're constantly having to punch buttons to take control, and that makes it, in my opinion, just a little more tedious to use. But it's rock solid stable. It's better for photographing. It'll take digital snapshots and put them on a like an SD card, you know, all that type of stuff, or a thumb drive. And of course it has the really high bandwidth and a whole bunch of other bells and whistles I'll probably never use. And this model also has, see if I can resurrect it from the back here, it has this module which plugs in down here, what they call the S-bus, and that turns this into a 16-channel logic analyzer. I'd been missing having a logic analyzer for years since I got rid of my Heathkit one. And now that I'm fooling around with vintage computers more and restoring some of them, that'll come in handy having that again. And this actually would do all 4 channels of analog plus the 16 channels of logic analyzer on the screen all at once if I set it up that way. So fairly powerful, but still I consider it my secondary scope. I still have my Heathkit frequency counter there, mostly for nostalgia, but it would be my first choice if I need a frequency counter. I also have this Siglent SDG1025. It's a function generator, arbitrary waveform generator, and frequency counter all in one. It's a 2-channel device, so you can be generating a waveform on one channel, using the other channel as an input to act as a frequency counter, or both channels can be outputs and you can have totally independent signals coming out of the 2 channels. I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's not really a review of this product, but you can type in any parameter using the keypad, or use the knob and which also it turns and clicks, or the cursor keys. You've got sine, square, ramp, pulse, sort of a white noise output, or up to 44 pre-programmed arbitrary waveforms, or you can program your own custom arbitrary waveforms. And again, as a compromise, comparing it to my Hewlett-Packard function generator, which in many ways is still my primary one, at least for quick and dirty stuff, you know, everything's right out there. There's a knob for everything. You can immediately access and turn any knob to change any parameter you want. Where on here, you're constantly having to push menu buttons, so you can use the single control to change one parameter at a time. So that's always the trade-off for these kind of things. But I kept finding situations where I wanted to have more than one signal being generated at a time, and this was my only signal generator. And so I said, well, I'll buy another signal generator. Then I decided to upgrade and get one that had a little more oomph to it. And between the two of them, I have 3 channels of function generation. And of course I still have my tech-powered DC electronic load. Still have my digital LC bridge from Heathkit. And this actual pulse generator, which I forgot to mention, that's actually like a 4th channel of signal generation if I want it. I've got my primary Simpson 260 up here now, even though I would rarely use it, but it seemed a shame to have it in a box, so I've got it out here next to my Heathkit VTVM. And I've just acquired another VTVM, which I'll probably do a separate YouTube video on. This is a Tektronix Model 2000. This is, if not the first, one of the first digital multimeters that you could buy for a price that a hobbyist could afford. This came out, I think, in when it came out? I want to say it came out like in 1977 or maybe 78. It was all the rage. This was hot stuff at the time. You know, people just couldn't believe you could have a full function digital multimeter with AC and DC volts, amps, ohms, and, you know, pretty reasonable accuracy for, I think they were asking $59.95 or something like that for the kit. And I bought one, and then shortly after bought their upgraded model. And then I disposed of them and kept wishing since that time that I'd kept at least one of them. So I kept looking on eBay, and most of the ones that would turn up were junkers. This one was very clean. It was being sold by a thrift shop who had no idea whether it worked or not. So I made them an offer, considering that the thing might be a total fry-out inside. And it actually was in almost immaculate condition. The NiCad battery pack for the rechargeable batteries had leaked. I had this replacement 5-cell pack made up by the local Batteries Plus. Somebody had hacked this thing at one point because it's originally a 4-cell, and there's a voltage regulator on this board for where the AC adapter plugs in. And they'd hacked, you can see some of the resistors tacked on, to provide a bit higher voltage as necessary to properly charge the 5-cell pack. They'd also hacked it down here by putting in a DC to DC converter, a hybrid one. Instead of that whole corner of the circuit board would have been full of parts to do the same thing. So I don't know if the original circuit failed or what, but somebody pulled all those out and put in a hybrid unit to do the same thing. I've tested it in all modes and it works really well, but the least significant LED digit was faulty and wasn't lighting up on all segments. And so I've already ordered a new set of displays from a surplus seller to replace one or more of those. But of course they sent me the wrong model. So it wasn't the one I ordered, it wasn't the one that was on the sales invoice, so I think they grabbed from the wrong bin. So I have to wait probably another week for the right ones to come in. Anyway, so there will probably be another video on that. And then another small coup, something I'm really thrilled to have again, is a Tektronix Model 212 handheld oscilloscope from I think 1974 these came out. And a company I used to work for, really my first engineering job for almost 10 years, it was in the design of high-speed printing press equipment, and we had a number of these, the 212s that we used for field service technicians to use, and then we had the I can't think of the proper model now. There was maybe 5 or 6 in this series, each with slightly different characteristics and capabilities. And the top of the line model was an analog storage scope. So it was just like this, except that it had the special storage type CRT in it, and we would use that to capture one-shot pulses coming from sensors on printing press rollers. And I couldn't find any of that model, but I had also used the 212 and had kind of nostalgic feelings for it, and this is a really clean unit here. I didn't really have to do anything to it. It's working quite well. You can see here that I've got a couple of waveforms, a sine wave and a arbitrary stepped waveform coming out of the Siglent, and I've got the same waveform displayed on the 212, on my good old analog scope, and on my new Siglent digital scope. Yeah, it works really well. The display is nice and clean. Really the only thing this is missing is the internal rechargeable batteries are toast. So luckily it's a popular enough model where OSI Batteries has a already figured out battery that you can buy for this that'll go in there and replace the original exactly, and it actually takes 2 of them. I've got those on order. When they come in I'll swap those out, and then this should be 100%. I don't think it even really needs any calibration. It's really close to where it needs to be, and I may do a separate video on this. Anyway, so that's pretty much the changes that have gone on in my workshop since my last video.